Hey, this is Nick J. Again hosting an episode of Chief Innovation Officer Fireside Chats. Today's guest is Russell Hanson, the Chief Innovation Officer at Sama Therapeutics, where he's leveraging AI to transform neuropsychiatry. Russell's work spans both mental health and developing some of the earliest COVID-19 rapid tests. On today's episode, Russell will help us explore how AI is affecting medical research and medical work. Thanks so much for joining us, Russell.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Pleasure to be here. Looking forward to our fireside chat.
Perfect. So the first question I'll kick off is what is innovation in the medical field, in the biotech field? Is it just new molecules and new drugs, or does innovation mean something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, I think of innovation oftentimes as bringing research results to the enterprise or bringing, papers to products. So for me, it's not restricted to drugs or therapeutics or molecules, but there's a lot that goes into medicine that's not molecules. I worked for a long time as a genetics professor and kind of a precision medicine scientist, and I guess in particular, I've moved away from a molecular view of the world, and I currently work at a neuropsychiatry company where it's really people's experience and their reaction to the world around them that's kind of driving a lot of what we do.
And can you just define neuropsychiatry in ways that that people who are not in that field can understand what that means?
Sure. Psychiatry broadly is the combination of neurology and psychiatry. So neurology would include things like Alzheimer's disease and neurological problems where you might want to see a neurologist, and psychiatry involves psychiatric disease where you'd want to see a psychiatrist. Exactly what's involved in neurology and psychiatry is complicated, but broadly speaking, psychiatry is the application of drugs to behavioral and psychiatric problems. It's complicated.
Got it. So can you tell me actually what is your job as Chief Innovation Officer at Sama? What do you do? What's hard about what you do, and what's easy about what you do?
Yeah, I was just talking with one of my colleagues earlier today, and I think a lot of us coming from precision medicine got into psychiatry thinking we'd be able to build predictive biomarkers in psychiatry, kind of like I've done for decades in oncology, where there's a particular single point mutation in a gene, and if you have that single point mutation in a gene, then you'll respond to this oncology drug. And psychiatry doesn't work that way, as any psychiatrist could tell you. Things change. People get a new job, a new girlfriend, boyfriend, house, car. Things change in people's lives, and their circumstances change, and it's not like there's a deterministic kind of gene that drives things. And indeed, I'd say that people who are looking for a gene that drives suicidality, it's really kind of a complicated. The statistical power in that area is very underpowered, as one might say.
So I understand some of the challenges that are unique to, let's say, wet science, right? As I was a dry science, physics, math guy, we don't have to deal with the complexities of, of human beings or biology. But what does a chief innovation officer do in the context of Sama specifically?
Yeah, I mean, broadly, we're working in the intersection of AI and neuropsychiatry, and so applications of artificial intelligence to drug development. So what are the best techniques? I guess I think of innovation as being we have a bag of tricks and we want to apply them to a particular use case, whether it's a new drug or a new intervention or a new assessment. And so we started working in the area of biomarker development with EEG brain scans. And as we mentioned just before this, we went on video. We're now working in generative AI. With the ChatGPT revolution in December of 2022. It's hard to ignore how much how well generative AI and large language models work and what they can do across the board, both in medicine and psychiatry and education and all of that.
So let's talk about the AI thing. I had another guest on from a hospital chain a few weeks ago, and he was talking about some of the privacy concerns around AI, as well as some of the bias concerns, right? So he was more cautious about some of the challenges that generative AI poses to the health field. You're talking about it in terms of, I think, a little bit more in terms of the opportunities. So where does Gen AI show up other than making, a doctor who can explain things to me in language that I can understand? How does it affect me as a non-medical professional, but who accesses, medical resources over time, as if I get sick or have operations or whatever?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm more on the provider side myself, and I think that we just wrote a chapter of a book that's being published by Springer that talks about both how generative AI will affect kind of how patients experience working with the health system and how doctors will experience working with generative AI in the health system. One of the specific use cases that we're working on is basically conducting a clinical trial on how generative AI works in clinical trials, and specifically avatars. So it's taking these new tools and assessing them, assessing how repeatable the data is that you can get from a generative AI tool or a generative video tool, and kind of validating that these are scientific instruments that can be used reliably and sustainably and ethically. The bias issue is definitely something that's come up. Came up a lot at the beginning of the generative AI boom with generative video and bias research. I think that it's gotten a lot better. A lot of the hallucination problems that people were having at the beginning have been alleviated or reduced, and the video aspect is confusing. If you're producing video for people in Northern Europe, maybe you would expect one thing. If you're producing video for people in Southeast Asia, maybe you would expect another thing. So it's kind of just, it's not a one size fits all solution, and there's a lot of like local biases, local politics, local best practices that will eventually be included in these models. And it's definitely very, very early stages right now.
A moment ago, you mentioned avatars being used in clinical trials. This is going to be a really dumb question, but do you mean like an AI chatbot is now injecting me with an experimental drug during this 5-year FDA trial? Or what does an avatar mean in the context of a clinical trial?
You get a treatment, and then there's a follow-up session. So it's not, the AI is not treating you. It's assessing your response to the treatment. Did you feel dizzy? Did you have trouble sleeping? Do you have pain at the injection site? Like a list of questions, really kind of like what you'd get on a phone call. But the opportunity we see is that because the generative AI system is more auditable and recordable and repeatable, that it would have less variability than a phone call, and that it could really just be superior to the traditional kind of like questionnaires that are being used.
When you say variability, do you mean that the human being who's doing that phone call or follow-up session is introducing randomness into the data collection process? And if so, why is an AI going to decrease that variability? Because AI, obviously, each time you ask ChatGPT something, it gives you a slightly different wording or slightly different emotional tone to that same question or prompt.
Yeah, personally, I think that people are more biased than any AI I've ever encountered. They have their own lived experience, and the AI is kind of averaging over all of that. So, on that basis, I personally, I think that AIs are less biased than an individual talking on the phone. And go ahead.
Oh, so I just have a fun data point there. So everyone always, as we discussed a moment ago, people talk about the biases of AI, but turns out people actually went and measured this. And what you said is actually factually true, that the AIs are on average less biased than human beings. So they tend to be on average more fair, more ethical, and less biased than the average human being. They are still biased, but again, the standard is not, hey, are they perfect? But rather, or at least I would argue the standard is not whether they're perfectly unbiased and fair, but are they better than the average person you're going to run across in normal society? And yes, the answer is like provably yes. There's tons of academic research on this out there.
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of intuitive, but yeah, it's great to hear that somebody bothered to do that study.
Well, I mean, it's not intuitive because you see some of the, the extreme cases that go viral on Twitter, like, Nazis who are not, Aryan, right? That was something that went viral about 5-6 months ago. And yet that is such an edge case where somebody engineered AI to break, basically, rather than actually demonstrate the average use case.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. So, Facebook and OpenAI and Google, they've all kind of injected a filter into their AI systems. I think it's called Prompt Guard on Llama. And what it does is it tries to prevent people from asking about how to build bombs or do other criminal or unethical activities. And there's really like a neural network that filters the inputs on a lot of these models. And so it's not unfiltered. Whatever you send to it, it goes through a filter first, and then it goes to multiple stages of filtration before it gets back to you on whatever it's supposed to, what you asked about.
Perfect. So let's jump back to Sama, and I'm going to ask a question that's kind of a little far afield of my knowledge of expertise. But I was reading a little bit on your guys' LinkedIn and website, and you have something called an Imagine platform. I don't actually know what that is. Can you explain what that is, why it's innovative, what's cool about it, and why it impacts me as a potential consumer of healthcare?
We're really focusing on more B2B than B2C. So for us, we're selling services to doctors and clinics and things like that, and how that would trickle down to the patient or the person seeking treatment. I think it's ultimately, we're just trying to make it easier for doctors and therapists to do their job by providing AI tools for them. But the Imagine platform is a multivariate, integration of language and biomarkers and phenotypes. Deep phenotyping would be the integration of like an Apple Watch or a Fitbit to your genetic phenotyping, so to say. And so it's an integrated system that does predictive biomarkers and assessments, and the goal is to save doctors time through the use of AI and data science.
And sorry, are you using this platform to identify new biomarkers? Are you correlating biomarkers to my current physical status through health monitoring watches? Or apologies, you got to dumb it down for me because I don't have that a healthcare background.
Yeah, it is very complicated. A lot of our team doesn't fully understand it, the different aspects of it. But like I said, right now we're really focusing on generative AI as a tool for assessments and intake. So saving people time from a busy doctor doesn't have time necessarily to spend 30 minutes on Zoom asking people every week how they responded to a treatment. Sometimes people only go to the psychiatrist every 2 months. But in the meantime, the patient can talk to an AI or an avatar or the AI system and say, this is working for me, this is not working for me, or schedule a follow-up appointment. And that data can be relayed to the doctor's office as well. So it's kind of like an AI office management system at some level. It's like, how do you get data from patients into a system and allow that data to kind of filter up to the people who need to see it when they need to see it.
One of the theoretical criticisms is that an AI can never be as good as human doctor because they can't read body language or tone, or they don't have 20, 30 years experience evaluating that, hey, what seems like a cold could be an indication of some, of some cancer, right? I personally don't subscribe to that. I think that, AI is pretty smart. Like, do you have a perspective on how good the data collection or data inference abilities of these AI tools are versus having a trained medical professional doing these intake or evaluation? Like, what's the state of the technology versus a human being doing this task today?
It varies a lot, of course. If you're talking about dermatology, taking pictures of a piece of skin and then seeing, does it have melanoma, does it have some other thing? It's right now the standards for AI to get approved through the FDA is very, very high. You have to be better than 95% accuracy, precision. So I'm not really worried. I mean, I know very few physicians I'm aware of would claim to be better than 95% accurate on on very much, and so yeah, I mean the regulatory standards are super high right now because people are afraid of false positives and false negatives. You can't in no situation really is the AI prescribing drugs to people. It's really a clinical decision support tool where the tool provides information to the doctor, and it's also used to augment kind of understaffed, under-resourced areas. So one example that came up recently is there's in the state of Indiana or Ohio, I forget, I'm just kind of repeating something somebody told me. There aren't very many neuro-oncologists who can look at brain biopsy samples and say that there is this particular cancer happening. And so offloading a lot of like very highly specialized work to an AI. It's just not getting done by people. It's not that you're taking somebody's job, it's that that resource is not available in a particular geographic or economic or region. And so it's really just providing a 95% accurate tool when there is no person who could do that job.
So let me ask a follow-up, right? You said that you set this 95% standard, and then at the same time you said, most doctors themselves will not say they hit that 95% standard. And I'm going to guess that you don't need to get a 95% on every single exam in medical school to get your license or to get your MD. So why, if what I said is asserted is true, that human beings themselves aren't hitting 95% in their medical accuracy, their medical education, why is the or not just the education, but also their in practice assessments, why is that the standard that AI would be held to?
Well, AI is, I don't work for the FDA. I don't really know what kind of decision making went into their standards, but that's kind of where it has been over the last couple of years. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, there was a lot of work on deep learning applied to imaging, in particular, skin lesions and tooth decay and radiology and MRIs. And, the standards were very rigorous. It's a little bit arbitrary. When you say 95%, you could always throw in some, a bunch of bogus data that doesn't have anything or that's confusing or poorly formatted, and you can always skew these numbers by data set selection or data selection. So it really is a cherry picked data set sometimes. If you give it lots of really easy examples, getting a perfect score might be easy. If you give it a lot of poor examples, the score will go down, just like anything.
Got it. Cool. One last question. So setting aside AI for a moment, which again is impactful in so many different fields, including yours, what other technologies or innovation, it doesn't have to be technologies, it could be processes, cultural changes, what other innovations are happening in your field other than AI that are going to make a difference either to the businesses that work with healthcare or to the end consumers of healthcare services?
I'm pretty bullish on AI. I've been working as a AI scientist for a long time, and for me, it's hard to kind of distinguish, different pieces of medicine that don't include AI. I mean, it's just so prevalent in what I do, and kind of bioinformatics, clinical informatics, health informatics. It's everywhere.
Perfect. That was my last question. Is there anything you wanted to talk about or mention that I didn't ask about today before we wrap up this episode?
Yeah, I mean, we're like we mentioned earlier. I think that the use of generative AI in kind of validated clinical settings is growing, and same with therapeutics is, I think, one of the leaders in that area. And it's a fascinating area of science and medicine to be a part of, and we're looking forward to the next few years and what comes in this amazing area.
Perfect. I personally, again, love AI. We use it for everything we do at IdeaScale. I use it in my personal life a ton, so really excited about how it's just impacting all these fields. Thank you again, Russell. Really appreciate you joining our episode today.
Thanks, Nick.